Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Bengal Tiger podcast. I'm Matthew Brune, and joining me once again is Shea Dixon. Shea, it was a hot day today at the practice fields at LSU, and it was practice number 8 for LSU football as they prepare for the season. Florida State is now 3 weeks away. Well, I guess a little over a day, 3 weeks and a day away. And again, I was out there at practice and a lot going on. But I did want to start off by saying I think it was the best day for the passing game of the 8 days at camp. That was the main takeaway of me. And then, talking to everybody else in attendance, it was like, yeah, these guys are, yeah, the receivers were able to get separation. The receivers were able to catch the balls. Daniels and Nussmeyers had a great day throwing the ball, I think, accurately, on time, on target. That was my biggest takeaway from today's practice. And I also want to say Malik Nabers continues to look just incredible. Like we talked last year about maybe seeing some of the question marks in Kayshawn Boute's game and Kyron Lacey's game last year. There have been no such question marks with Malik Nabers this year. He is phenomenal. He is catching everything. He brings an edge to him every practice that I love. So that was the practice that I needed to see from this offense because I've been not vocal, but I've been saying I didn't think that they were having a great practices so far. I thought the secondary was actually doing a good job on them, but this was a really good practice for them, and that's where I wanted to start off this podcast by saying.
I think it's one of those things too where I can remember even another that was last week. When did they get into the scrum or whatever?
Yeah,
And Kelly sends Malik Nabers and Lacey to the locker room. Literally 10 minutes before that, Malik had the best catch I saw at camp. Like caught one handed,
mm-hmm.
and I think it might have been Zy Alexander was like tied to his hip 40 yards downfield, and he just got separation at the end, caught it one hand, got his feet down, you know, gets up screaming about, I'm him basically, and he is. And I think that, like you wrote today, Chris Hilton, one of my favorite guys on the team, you jumped 7 foot again. I mentioned this last week in the podcast. This is a kid who jumped 7 foot in the high jump as a freshman in high school. Like kids in Texas in 6A are trying to touch seven, are hitting 7 foot as seniors to win
Yeah,
state. And Chris Hilton was doing that as a freshman in high school. He was a jump out of the gym basketball player at Zachary. He just hasn't been healthy, and that's no fault of his own. I mean, he's just run into injury after injury the past 2 years. Now he's in year 3 and he's healthy. He was healthy in the spring. Now he's healthy in the fall. And you wrote he just torched multiple very good
yeah,
LSU DBs for touchdowns in the scrimmage or in, I guess, Saturday's practice.
yeah.
And he is the number 4 receiver on the team right now. Or, he's behind the older, well, some are his age, Brian Thomas, Nabers,
Yeah.
Kyron Lacey, and now you've got Aaron Anderson who transfers in and certainly has a role as kind of a very speedy guy who, when you get him into space, he's dangerous. But Hilton's a big kid. It's not like he is a, 5'6" slot
Yeah.
receiver, just runs fast. When he's healthy, he can roll. And you toss in all these freshmen they just signed, Shelton Sampson, Kyle Parker, and Brown, and Preon, and you've got now Ibieta and Hilton, and if I'm missing anyone else, I
Yeah,
apologize.
you
But
named them all pretty much. Aaron Anderson.
it's a deep room. It's not like the deepest receiver room in the country, but everyone is super talented and everyone belongs on LSU's roster. And I guess this was my long-winded way of saying there'll be games where it is so tight and they'll need a 3rd and 7 to hit, and you're just like, Malik's got to get open. Like that will just be the answer, or it'll be 3rd and 12 or 3rd and 14, and Malik just goes down and makes a play. And I've seen it already enough in fall camp, and we saw it last year when Butte wasn't who Butte normally was, coming off that injury and just kind of in and out of the rotation and all of that of the lineup, not even playing in some games.
Yeah.
Nabers goes for over 1,000 yards. He didn't skip a beat, and he did it as a sophomore. It's like, the SEC's on notice. Every corner is going to want to, knows he's coming. They're going to put their best guy on him. I don't think it matters. He's a first round pick. Like he is an absolute dog. And when they get into some tight spots this year, he's going to need to bail them out of it.
Yeah. Flipping over the secondary, where a lot of people want to talk about having, ups and downs throughout camp, whatnot. I was actually, again, like I said, pretty high on the secondary coming out the first week of camp, where I thought, for my expectations, they held their own. I feel really good about the secondary room if Greg Brooks is healthy, because then you have Brooks, Burns, and Andre Sam, three guys who I like a lot. And Brooks can kind of rotate down to nickel if they need him. Sage Ryan doesn't have as much on his plate if that's the case, which I like. But the cornerback spot in particular, we have reached a point where we are 8 practices deep. We're 3 weeks away from game day, and it's still Zy Alexander and it's still Deuce Chestnut starting at corner. And it's not Denver Harris that has become the third best corner, the third most trusted corner in fall camp. And it's not even LaTerrence Welsh. It's Ashton Stamps, who is getting some run with the first team, getting a ton of run with the second team. And this is a guy who was a 3-star prospect out of Louisiana. We saw him in camp in 2022 to try to earn an offer, and he did, and he committed. And a lot of people, I think he went up against Shelton Sampson and Catholic during the season last year. I remember watching that. He had some good reps there. As much as you loved him in camp, as much as I respected him and I thought he had long-term potential, nobody expected him to step on campus and potentially be the third best corner in the room, or at the very least, a second team corner right away. Like, that's been one of the biggest surprises of camp.
And think about how much different he looks right now than he looked when you saw him at that first summer camp when he was going into his senior year. I think he's just put so much work into not just his game, but his body over the past year. And even more so getting here this summer, he didn't have that kind of, I don't think he was a spring guy. He was here this summer. Rummel guys, I don't think typically come early. I don't think he was there in the spring, was he?
Gosh, now I'm trying to remember. I don't think he was. I don't think so. Him and Kylan Jackson weren't here. Let me pull up the depth chart here.
Well, either way,
Go ahead.
he doesn't look like a freshman. He looks like a kid who's been in the program a couple of years, or at least a full year. I think that's a big difference too. That's allowed him to get out there and start taking these reps. So I'm not going to say I'm going to be surprised if he's playing some ball early on, but I do think at least it shows that, hey, this is a guy that some recruiting services had as one of the lowest ranked kids that LSU signed, but that's just what Louisiana is going to give you. If you can evaluate it and go out and get kids like Ashton Stamps who want to be here and want it, I think that's a big, big, big piece to kind of the puzzle beyond just Louisiana churning out top 100 prospects or whatever it might be. Was he not here?
No, he wasn't. He was not here. He was not here in the spring.
So that says a lot then.
Yeah.
Because he's now doing all of this off of 2 weeks of fall camp. That's his first 2 weeks of practices with the team. And that means like you said, in high school, his game of the year was getting to go up against Shelton Sampson. Shelton Sampson is on this team right now. Like, going up against him would be like the 6th hardest guy. Like, there's 5 or 6 guys above Shelton who've been in college and are much more developed and know what to do on the receiver side than a guy who's a freshman 2 weeks into camp. And for Stamps to even be out there repping with those guys, I think is a really big deal. You did say that Mason Smith went down. They helped him out. He walked off. Doesn't sound like anything major there. I know that nobody's beyond J.K. Johnson has run into any big injury concern. Mason Smith is on the short list of guys you cannot have injured. So any thought there?
Yeah, that was very concerning because it was at the end of practice and he went down, and then they immediately moved. They did how they do the 11-on-11. They just moved him down like 20 yards and then kept going. And Smith was helped off the field. And then I was encouraged that he didn't go to the tent. He didn't leave practice, even though very well could have with 10, 15 minutes left on the day. He went back to the sideline, like he took a lap almost, and then came back to the sideline and had his helmet off. Just he walked right by me and he just looked like kind of angry, but didn't look like dejected in the way that I'm sure obviously he was last year. He looked okay, but that was definitely the scariest point of the entire fall camp, was seeing him go down, because that is a player they cannot afford to lose this year. Last year, they couldn't really afford to lose him, but this year, as much as I like the depth that they have, he is such an important piece of what this defense is and can be, they really cannot afford to lose him. Like, that is an all SEC first team talent there. So, yeah, he was okay. Everybody else, I mean, Greg Brooks didn't practice today, even though he practiced earlier in the week. So we don't know 100% what his situation is.
Yeah, we saw that in the spring too, that he would be like, if he was banged up, he would just be off for a day and then he would come back and play. So they're probably taking it easy on him.
Yeah. So everybody else, though, I think is in pretty good shape at this point. I haven't seen anybody else that's looks like they're going to miss any extended time.
I did want to ask you, because you were at Saturday's practice. I was covering DeCorian Moore's commitment, 5-star receiver out of Duncanville, who announced kind of right as practice was wrapping up. But you talked about at least some one-on-one individual matchups that happened, and getting to watch Harold Perkins and Will Campbell's always fun. They're elite as can be, and Campbell can win 30% of those reps, and you consider that a W if you're just like one-on-one with Harold Perkins trying to stop him from getting by you. But you did say that Wingo and Wiggins, that Womack and Wiggins both got some wins. Those are two guys that have been playing D-end behind Savion Jones, and we're both on board with Savion Jones as being a breakout year candidate. Everything looks like it's coming together for him. He's going to start. Are we getting any better feel yet for what two other former 5-stars in Wiggins and Womack, who are both very quality players, kind of what their outlook might be? Given, I think a lot of people are just like, well, I'm cool with Savion Jones starting. Sure, he's the best one and all that, but how do you get those other guys involved?
Yeah, and Quincy Wiggins, I don't think he's had a great camp. I don't think he's jumped off the page or off the field like at you when you're watching for the most part. Today, I do think was one of his better days. Like I said in the story, he won a few one-on-one reps against some starters, against some second string guys that you want to see him start winning more frequently. And whether that was last year, whether that was spring, whether now in the fall, he didn't feel like he had the array of moves that can really create that advantage that you need as a defensive end. Now he's as athletic as hell. He's incredibly quick. He's a great athlete, but you want to see him start to build those pass rushing moves out a little bit more. He was always raw coming out of high school, and kind of just relied on his size, which is tremendous. But now you want to see him start to put it all together. And I think he is going to be able to do that this year. He's not going to be as good as Savion Jones, but I think he'll be able to step in and play a significant role for this defense as a backup defensive end. And if they rotate the defensive line, which I expect them to a good amount, he'll be in there quite a bit. Deshaun Womack, I know some people are like, oh, he hasn't done anything in fall camp, or he's been, hasn't been winning as many reps as people will think. I look at it as a freshman that is getting put in a situation where they're playing him at two different positions, basically. Like, they're putting him at defensive end, and then you'll watch practice, and he's not with the defensive ends; he's with the Jacks, and he's going back and forth. And you kind of wish they would just decide on one position and put him there, and just work him there for at least the fall camp, and maybe move him later. But no, I think the upside with Deshaun Womack is evident. I think it's obvious, and I don't look at him the same way I look at Quincy Wiggins. I think he very much is a technically skilled pass rusher that's probably just figuring it out at this point of fall camp. So that's how I see that kind of group just kind of working out right now. I will say Ovia Gofu has gotten better as fall camp has gone on. That's a Jack.
He's your Jack starter, is what we presume, coming in from Texas. And he signed and played with Brian Kelly at Notre Dame before Texas. So he's been around the block. He knows what to expect. I'll say this on Womack, and I'd posted this on the board, and this is straight from my eyes to your ears here. This is my opinion, but I saw it happening, and I know the reality of it. Right before we got on, Matty B, you said, I mentioned, I've been covering the Duncanville kids all week. Matty B handled the last two practices. I'm in the AC. Matty B got on after Saturday's practice and said this was the hottest day out there. And that's saying something, because we've set a record in Baton Rouge for consecutive days over 100 degrees. Feels like it's always about 115, 120, it seems, out there. Yeah. Deshaun Womack's from Maryland, and he was out all spring because he was recovering from a shoulder surgery. Now, you can run all you want this summer and get conditioned and everything, but you're doing it basically in underwear. I mean, Put on all the pads, go out there and go full speed at fall camp in your first ever college camp. And Womack, even this past week when I was at practice, he came off at one point and was like, I'm dying. And all the Louisiana kids are sitting there laughing at him like, you'll be fine, man. Like, it's going to take a while for you to get used to this.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, pouring water jugs down his back and covering him in towels. And after a few minutes, he's like, okay, I'm fine. I can go back in now. They're just doing that. I mean, that's all day for 2 straight hours every day until the rest days. So I'm not surprised that he doesn't look like the guy on film in high school right now, because he's having to get used to a completely different element. Now, after a month of that, he's going to be in a lot better shape than he's ever been in his life, and it's going to set him up well. But right now, especially when we get to these team portions of practice, you're talking about he's already been out there for an hour and a half in 110-degree heat. And as a true freshman coming from the Northeast, it is just tough to get adjusted to that.
Yeah. I won't go position by position, but generally, if we look at, what I've learned or what we've learned from fall camp so far, as opposed to what has stayed the same, I think as far as what stayed the same, the running back position is still very much up in the air. We still don't have any answers there. I think offensive line depth, I asked Mike Denbrock about that, and he was like, that's going to be a minute. Like, he kept saying, that's going to be a minute. That's going to be a minute. And so offensive line depth, still a question mark. Secondary / corner, I guess, still kind of a question mark. But what I will say is, when you look at this defense in particular, and you look at, all right, this is how the secondary could potentially work out. The more I look at the secondary, the more I think this team is going to need Harold Perkins and Omar Speights to be all SEC level. Like, I just think it's going to come down to their versatility, their impact in the run game, their impact pressuring the quarterback, because Omar Speights can do that as well. And how Matt House maximizes what he gets from those two linebackers in particular. And then you throw Greg Penn in there, because we like Greg Penn, and he will play a lot. But what he gets from that linebacker group has to, I don't want to say mask, because I don't think the secondary is a total deficiency, but they have to outweigh kind of the question marks you have in the secondary. Those guys have to be all SEC caliber if this team is going to get to where it wants to be. Because I know what I'm getting from the defensive line for the most part. Like, I know what I'm getting from Wingo, Smith, Jones, Gofu / Swinson. Like, it's those linebackers that are the biggest question marks to me, and that's not a bad thing. Those are two potentially All-Americans playing at linebacker. And if they can maximize their potential there, that's going to set them up really well for the rest of the season. So that's my biggest thing from watching, 6-7 practices so far this fall.
Well said. I agree completely. I like how you laid that out as well. Okay, let's close out here, because we were kind of just doing a quick recap of, like I said, Matty B's thoughts, some of my thoughts on practice this week. It's another week. It's another week where people might be listening and say, okay, the podcast is almost done and you haven't mentioned Denver Harris. And Denver Harris was a 5-star coming out of high school. He was the top cornerback. He played on North Shore, and they're one of the best teams in the country. He goes to A&M. He's a midseason All-American as a true freshman. Looked phenomenal at A&M the first half of the season. Gets suspended by Jimbo, he and a handful of kids. Doesn't play the rest of the year. Transfers to LSU. All offseason, we said he's the most talented one that they signed of the 4. He's getting third-team reps, and at times gets some second-team reps. And I've called it dangling a carrot in front of his face to make sure that he's got to want it, he's got to buy in, all those things. I'm not going to ask you about that. When you see him, does he look like Denver Harris that you expected, or are there some spots where you say the guys in front of him are playing better than he is?
I think he's still the most talented addition that they have. I think he's the most talented cornerback they have. And today he made a nice pass breakup in man coverage. Ricky Collins threw the ball, and he broke it up on a nice play. But then 2 days ago, when we saw him, he got chewed out by Coach Steeples for, I don't want to say busting an assignment, but maybe not executing the way he wanted him to. So I feel like that's the problem right now, is the execution part of things. Now at A&M, it was more so they left him on an island and just kind of said, do whatever you can do. Do what you do, because he is so strong and physically mature and talented as a young person. That's what A&M wanted. I don't think that's what this team needs. I don't think this team is comfortable putting anybody on an island right now. And we've seen them work a lot of zone. We've seen them work a lot of different stuff with the cornerbacks and safeties. I just think he hasn't quite picked up on it as fast as they wanted him to, and he's not performing at that level right now. And it is a concern, because I think I've said on this podcast before, it's like we expected Denver Harris to come in, and even if he's not an All-American, he is your best corner, and he is able to, like I said, do what he did at A&M and just kind of take a receiver and limit his production for a game. They don't have that right now. And so we'll see if Denver comes around. I still think he's very talented, but I've seen too many missed assignments, blown coverages, he's not executing at the same level. That's the biggest concern right now, is that he's just not quite at that level. And it might take him 4 or 5 weeks or something in the season to get there. I think at some point, though, he's too talented to just not help this team at all this year. That would shock me.
I agree. Well, another week down, one more week to go. And then they'll get back to school and normal practices and the season. So we're not too far out.
Yeah. And no media watching the practices.
That's right. No more sweating out there for 2.5 hours. But hey, shout out Brian Kelly we've never had a fall camp where we just got to watch almost every single practice for the entire time. So it's been nice.
It's very weird. Last thing I'll say, it's you start to understand how the coaches, because as fans and as media, you're always like, man, coaches get to see these guys 2 hours every day. How do they not see that X is better than Y, or that this and that? It's not enough time. 2 hours is not enough time, man. There's so much to cover, and that's so much that these guys try to cover. It really is something to watch. So yeah, that's it. Again, as always, if you're a subscriber on the Bengal Tiger On3, you can post on the board. Me, Shea, we're always very responsive to your questions about camp, our daily updates. We give them every day, and just let us know what you think. So if you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, leave us a like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you're listening on the audio side, leave us a 5-star rating and review. We'll be back later in the week to update y'all on fall camp, probably recruiting as well, now that Billy's back from Maine. And yeah, till then, we'll talk to y'all later.